Obviously, the name itself says it on the tin. Episodic marketing means kind of building shows in a series. But do you want to give us like a bit of a highlight as to, or an overview? What is episodic marketing? And very important, I just the audience here today are predominantly coming from B2B brands, but also from organizers, event organizers, or companies that have organized events that have produced a lot of virtual events today.
Mhm.
So just let us know what is it about, and how, and then we can just basically take the conversation from there.
Yeah, for sure. So basically, the way that we would define episodic marketing is just as it says on the label, marketing that is done in the form of episodes, or content that's delivered in the form of episodes. And, whether we're running our own events as event organizers, or whether we perhaps even are thinking about pre-recorded event sessions that we've done before, really, as all of us as marketers, right? It's really up to us to make that decision to almost package something as a show, to package something as a series, whereby every session is not just a session, but rather it's an episode as part of a longer series. And once you have the first set of episodes, you can almost have your first season done, and then you can go on to the second season, so on and so forth. But ultimately, it's a bit of a mindset shift in terms of thinking of content not just as all of these different channels and things that we could possibly doing, because there's no end, right? There's always new like platforms and tips and tricks that are popping up, and it could really lead to burnout for all of us as marketers. Rather, a much more minimalist but also effective way of doing it is to think of everything in terms of episodes, to think of yourselves as show directors, show producers. Because if you think about it, every episode, and we'll definitely be unpacking this together, Ricardo, every episode could help us to get a lot of that content out of it, whether that's written content or smaller video snippets, or even audio, as well as image content. So for those of us who love different types of content formats, you can actually get all of that from your episodes anyway. But that's the gist of it anyway. Yeah.
And I just think that, like, anyways, if you're most B2B brands currently are running webinars. More B2B brands, and especially within the companies and the people that we serve, they're running events and everything. They will have virtual events. And anyways, a webinar, am I right saying so? A webinar is kind of a part of episodic marketing. It's a tool to do episodic marketing, right? So in its own right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny though, because there's so many webinars these days that some of our favorite brands are, making the decision to package it a little bit differently. A webinar and an episode are pretty much, they're very, very similar. The only difference is one is called a webinar and one is called an episode. And so if people make a decision, a creative decision that, hey, we're not going to refer to these as just on-demand webinars. We're actually going to refer to these as, we're going to refer to this as a show. And here's
Right.
episode 7, episode 8. You know what I mean? It just makes it easier for people to consume that show, because, or consume each episode, because they realize that it's part of an ongoing series, and it just makes it so much easier for them to consume that content. Maybe they see something in the middle and then they decide, okay, let me actually go back to the very start of that series and watch it in order. But it's also so much more than that, Ricardo. I mean, in terms of actually creating something that at the heart of it is very much audience focused, as opposed to like company focused. So it's not always about us, but rather it's about the audience. And a lot of us, who come from like a content background, inbound background, we get that. But to push it a step further, it's almost about also creating that content in a way that is focused on entertainment first, which might potentially shock a lot of people, that even though we naturally want to educate people and add value to them, one of the best ways to add value to people is actually to entertain them as well. And it doesn't mean that it has to be a comedy show or like a humorous thing. Entertainment could also be inspiring someone, motivating someone, creating content that's thought provoking, that gets them to think about something in a different way. Think of a documentary, for example. I would regard a documentary as something that's entertaining. And if you can build that entertainment value, you're now slowly joining the ranks with all of the Netflixes, the Hulus, the Disney Pluses of the world as such. Yeah.
Okay, so I really want to get into the real meat of it and into the detail about it. So, Karim, you have written, or you have created a framework. So you've got what you call the episodic marketing framework, and then you have also a show strategy. So if at any point in time you want to kind of you want me to bring that up, just please feel free to let me know to bring it up. But how, to me, is B2B marketing or B2B brands? Let's say I've got a company on the chemical industry, or I've got an event, or whatever that might be. B2B brands, sometimes, how do you make something like, you see what I'm saying, fun, or how do you make it in that sort of way? And because I'm just really curious, or like sometimes they're like very dense topics, and how do you make that entertaining? And can you expand there, unpack that a little bit, and then let's just put it into the perspective of an event organizer that's kind of thinking about, okay, how do I make my event more entertaining, or how do I do this pre-event or post-event? And now that we're going to share our framework as well here, we're going to discuss it and we're going to dissect that. But
yeah,
how do you do that?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to give you guys a very quick example based on something that we're doing at the moment, and then we can definitely look at what that would look like for event organizers and B2B companies that are running events, right? So our company, as Stripe Tactics, what we do is we help companies create create shows and video series, and then we help them to repurpose it so that each episode they can get a bunch of content out of that. So what should our marketing strategy be, right? If you put yourself in our position. So we obviously have to take a bit of our own medicine because we realize it's the most effective thing. So we decided to create a show about other companies who are very successful in creating shows. So it's a little bit like the movie Inception, if you've seen it. And we came up with a concept called showstoppers. Now, if you're hearing this now, you're probably one of the first to hear this because we're about to announce it soon. But for showstoppers, we have about 7 episodes so far done of that. And in this case, we decided to create a show where we're actually bringing a lot of entertainment value just by the way the show is branded and the packaging of it, the intro, the outro, the types of questions we ask, the different tone that we bring to the show. But in addition to that, we try and focus on really interesting subject matters that are entertaining for that specific audience. I'll give you one last example before we jump right into the framework. But for example, a game of chess. Yesterday, I was watching a game of chess, and I found it very, very interesting. My wife found it extremely boring. Right? It's the same thing that brings me entertainment value may not necessarily bring someone else that same entertainment value. I'm sure there are topics that she's interested in that wouldn't be entertaining for me. So when we think about our own businesses, we really have to think about or realize that entertainment value and creating something that's binge-worthy is very subjective to that specific audience. What you will create will, by definition, be very interesting for some people and very boring for others. And that's okay, because ultimately it's all about appealing to a specific target audience as such. So Ricardo, if you want, maybe we can even go through each stage of the episodic framework.
Yeah, I think I've got it now on screen, and please tell me to the chat panel if you can see me in a little thing, and then the model there. Let's go through that. Can you see it properly?
Yeah, I think it looks good to me.
Let's just go to it. So talk us through this framework.
Perfect. And Ricardo, please feel free to stop me at any stage, because it'd be good for us to have a discussion around these for sure. But yeah, basically, when we think of creating shows, it can get very fun very quickly. And the purpose of this framework is to make sure that anything that we do create is focused on bottom line results. So it's a 4-step process. It's basically plan, produce, repurpose, and distribute. And within each stage, as you can see, there's a few steps basically. So it all starts with us planning the show, right? Now, keep in mind, especially because if you are a B2B company that's already creating events, you're already a leg up over the competition. If you're an event organizer, you're already a leg up on the competition because you already have some of the makings of something that's very difficult for other companies to even think of, which is content that actually matters. Now, all that we need to do is figure out how we can actually package that as a show series, right? So when it starts off with the show strategy, and depending on whether this is an event that's going to be coming up in the future or perhaps a set of recorded sessions that you've recently completed, it really all comes down to positioning and packaging it. It could be as simple as making a decision to call this a show or call this a series. And to start using show terminologies like that, rather than having sessions, you now have episodes. rather than having a set of
Mm.
random videos. Like, it's actually something that's going to be a dedicated show as such. And from there, within the show strategy, we can actually start to look at the specific the specific positioning for that audience as well. So naturally, if we follow the inbound methodology, or HubSpot, they talk a lot about personas, of course. And similarly to the show content that you create, we really have to zoom in on one specific persona that this show will be created for. And once we figured that out, we then look at what is our goal with that persona. And broadly speaking, our goal from an events perspective is either brand awareness, or it's business development, or in many cases, it could be both as well. So whether it's brand awareness or business development, that's actually going to affect what type of topics we end up talking about, if it's something that's going to be in the future. Or maybe it's, we're looking at curating a set of specific topics around a certain theme, as well as the guests. To give you a quick example, with brand awareness, we're obviously trying to get the word out there. We're trying to get as much engagement as possible, maybe as much traffic as possible. So in that sense, we may decide to focus on topics that are particularly popular from a search perspective, for example. We may also decide to look at, for example, guests and feature guests and conversations with guests that have a certain level of clout score, or a certain network size, because we want them to share that content on. So it's very much brand awareness focused. Whereas on the business development side, perhaps we decide, we're actually going to go after a set of target accounts and co-create content with these people. So if I want to do business with a specific set of 20 companies, why don't I find something that these guys have in common and reverse engineer that to create some form of a series of episodes around that?
That's pretty cool. And I think, let me just kind of unpack that, because I think that's fundamental. So for the audience out there, please let us know if Proceed, I'm going in the wrong direction, and I'm very happy to put it back on track. But for event organizers or event promotion type of scenario, the plan stage, everybody, you guys already have a strategy, because you're going to basically, you very likely are going to have an event taking place. So your main goal is going to drive awareness, is going to be to generate registrations and to do all that stuff. Very likely you will have topics, because your conference or your virtual event is going to have topics already in place. And very likely you're going to have some guests that are going to be. So is it fair to say, Karim, that in the angle and the side of event organizers, media businesses, and companies that are running virtual events, the plan stage is kind of already done? And I think it's just more of a matter of framing that accordingly and positioning that in the way that it is. Like, for instance, we did this is the last episode, so to speak, of the digital pivot series in our series of webinars. And I think it just makes it very easy to market. It makes it very easy to promote. And the other aspect that I think it's very, very, very important is that, so the value proposition is, okay, what are you aiming to generate out of this? And of course, it's going to be brand awareness. You want to make sure that your event, if this is pre-event, by the way, you want to make sure that your event gets seen by a lot of people, and ultimately they registered to attend the event. And so in that side of things, and then you can either involve sponsors, and that's going to basically help to drive value. You can get, obviously, your speakers. You might be able to get your rejects of people that have said, "Oh, sorry, I'm not going to be able to join your live event, but I really had an interesting story to tell," and then that's kind of a way for you just to add value. Does that make sense, Karim? Right, in the framework that we're talking about.
100%, and I completely agree with you that people who are already in the game, in the events game, right, they definitely have a leg up on the competition, as I mentioned earlier, because the plan stage and perhaps some elements of the produce stage as well, are naturally inherent. They're naturally part of the job. But I completely agree with you, Ricardo, like on the importance of just reframing it or packaging it. They are very, very similar, but all good marketing is ultimately packaging and that kind of story that you tell.
Totally.
Yeah,
totally. And then I just kind of wanted to add one thing there, and the fact that online communities is becoming extremely, extremely important and extremely, extremely topical. Episodic marketing comes as a I personally see it as a savior for marketeers and companies out there, because there's generally a question is, how can we engage our online community further? How can we, and then these kind of slicing and dicing this content beforehand, before the event takes place, helps to drive that engagement within that community, helps to drive that engagement within social media, and then it's actually giving you a taster of what it's going to look like. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And this is kind of a part of, and I just kind of really want to make sure that I am linking everything, all these, how episodic marketing will fit into the online community strategy, and how it will fit in with your pre-event promotion. So, and I was just kind of probably thinking about this on the planning stage. What are the types of, okay, let me just give you an example, and I'm going to probably put you on the spot here, Karim. And
please do.
I've got an event, right? So 25 different sessions, probably more, 8, whatever number of sessions. Let's say I've got between 8 and 25 sessions that are going to be either pre-recorded or live, and I'm specifically thinking about pre-event. What are the most common, or what you see the successful types of episodic marketing that an event organizer could do, if at all?
Okay, so there's a lot of stuff that could be done. One of our favorite examples that we see is, and it's very, very smart, right? It's actually leveraging the opportunity of creating shows as something that you can actually sell to sponsors, right? So actually finding a way to create sponsorship packages and to extend extend existing sponsorship packages, even to, looking at, okay, a company can now sponsor one episode, right? Or they can sponsor a set of episodes, or they can even sponsor a whole season, and you get to define what a season is. A season could be 10 of those 20, 25 that you mentioned, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of value that company would be creating for the sponsors if they actually include that as part of their sponsorship packages. Not to mention, once we actually talk about repurposing in a short while, the sponsors are not just paying for attention, obviously, during the event, but actually mostly after the event as well, because of all the repurposed content that they get to have their name on as well, depending on the way that would make sense. But that's definitely something that we found, a great way to be value adding to the sponsors that are involved, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just really wanted to highlight on that so that we can kind of move on and kind of with the framework. So to be clear to all the audience and to whoever is going to be watching this. So episodic marketing is great for pre-event promotion, but it's absolutely brilliant for post-event promotion, right? And then we'll delve into that. But so, and understandably, pre-event, you might have, let's say you might have 10 weeks before your event takes place. So you might want to be able to you don't really need to feature all of your speakers. You don't really need to feature all of your sponsors. You might just want to pick 8, or you might just want to pick 7, or you might want to pick 6. But what that allows you to do is just to have, and I think, is it fair to say, Karim, that like on the frequency, and especially within the events perspective, ideally you want to do it every week. Yeah, every week, and then so that you can then start having all this and building that momentum. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as the company in question is able to stick to consistently stick to whatever cadence they pick, it's ultimately about that consistency. Yeah, 100%.
And I think the important element is the consistency. And what would be the length of that episode? And I think that will be the question that many people will be having. What will be that particular length? Is it best to do it 10 minutes, an hour? What works best?
Yeah, so think about it this way. It's almost like saying, hey, what's the best length for a Netflix episode? And as we can all agree, like, it really does vary. However, there tends to be some form of an average or a median. And usually it's anywhere from 20 minutes to 40 minutes. I'm reflecting on our own show right now that we're currently running. That's anywhere from like 30 to 45 minutes sometimes. Traditionally, like podcast episodes, like audio only podcast episodes, to provide a comparison, sometimes these would go up to like 50, 60 minutes sometimes. Some people like to do 2 birds with 1 stone and say, you know what, one of the things we're going to be repurposing from our event is we want to also get audio podcasts, for example. And so they decide to create longer videos as a result of that, because they have a vision and they're planning to get a lot of different things out of it. So to tell you the truth, it's really up to each show and each audience and what makes the most sense. But if we're starting from scratch, I would say anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes as such.
And by the way, I've seen many people in the event industry doing what they call these shows, and they do it like the very short. It's just a 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and I think this works very well as well for social media and brand awareness. But do not be scared to, if you have one big important person that you have on your show, to extend it, because that's kind of where the beauty of repurposing comes through. And then probably then is a kind of a good way to kind of come back to the framework. So don't be scared to make it longer, because if the conversation is good, if the conversation is hot, if the conversation is topical, then you're going to have amazing opportunities to chop and slice and dice that moving forward. Let me just kind of again, kind of let's go back into the framework here, so that you were able to expand on the other stages.
Perfect. By the way, Ricardo, I have to say I love the animations. They're very effective.
I'm loving it too.
It's
like
super
a little
cool.
kid in a candy shop.
You're giving us a lot of ideas now. But yeah, basically going on to the second stage with produce. Like, we're not going to spend too much time on that, because I feel like we are speaking to people who of course who would have a lot of experience with this. But so I'm going to skip the produce stage. But to summarize that quickly, it's everything that goes into preparing and recording these sessions, whether they're done obviously like virtually, or if they are done in person. Obviously these days most events are naturally running virtually. So produce is what you think produces. So I'm going to skip that for the sake of time.
Fine.
In terms of
and also, by the way, just a note, we released last week a blog post as part of the promotion part of this event on how you would actually produce the nice video recording for your show or for your event. So Caroline will probably share the link to that blog in the chat panel. So you guys have that reference. But anyways, event organizers, or if you've ever produced an event, you will know exactly what you need to do. The only difference is that you now have video, but the same process works. Okay, Karim, go ahead.
Perfect. Yeah. So yeah, carrying off the back of that. So the next step then would be repurposing, and we can talk at length of that. But in essence, it's all about how do we take these episodes and really extract the most value out of them. So whether that is repurposing that content into video or audio or image or written. So I want you to really remember like these 4 formats: video, audio, image, and written, because these episodes really could serve more than just the long form videos of them. And let's be honest, statistically, most people may not necessarily have the time to go through these long videos in detail. Sometimes all they need, or sometimes they need a motivation. Sometimes all they need is that smaller teaser clip that was a video, or that social card, which was like a quote, maybe that was of something that was mentioned in the video. Sometimes they need that little motivation to go back to the original piece. And let's be honest, once again, sometimes they may never even see the full episode, but that doesn't stop us from still having that conversation with them. Maybe they just want to read, the highlights or the greatest hits, so on and so forth. So basically for repurpose, we have 3 stages there, which is formats, channels, and use cases. So these 4 things that I've talked about, video, audio, image, written, these would be the different formats, right? And now the next layer to make it a bit more contextual are the different channels. So depending on what events and what industries you guys are creating, you may decide to prioritize certain channels over others, right? So LinkedIn will naturally be very, very relevant to anyone who is in B2B. But in addition to LinkedIn, you may have a case for using Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, so on and so forth. And so creating content formats that are actually contextual to these specific channels is something that really, really goes the distance, so that we're not just copy pasting the same content across the different clips.
Yeah, and I just really wanted to kind of highlight this, that the magic really with episodic marketing is the repurpose part, because you are doing absolutely no good to your event if you're not repurposing the content that you produce. And I just really wanted to take this opportunity to highlight something from Helen Disney on the chat panel. That she was asking that she's planning on producing a bi-weekly chat show, which is great, by the way, Helen. So, and the question is that, like, if whether either we have a view on, or if it is better to make it a live event and then release the recordings after, as well as clips, or just pre-record so that you can edit them and make it more slick. What's your view on that? I have a view on that, but I'll give you the option the opportunity to answer that, Karim.
Yeah, Ricardo, why don't you go first?
Okay, so Helen, I think that my view is a personal view, is that within events in particular, we want to be generating leads, we want to be generating engagement. So I almost always favor the live environment, because the live environment, number one, allows you to create and build some momentum leading to that particular live episode. And also it allows you to, if you want to generate leads. So for instance, these webinar series, I like to just get people registered, because I like to have the opportunity to have that live interaction with someone like you, being able to answer the questions live. And I like to generate leads, of course, as we all are here trying to make a living generating leads and sell our services. But so I like the live environment, because that's kind of what it gives me the opportunity to do. And then post, and by the way, I don't mind the number of registrations I get, because I know that statistically I can receive 3 times as much registrations post-event than the ones that I will receive pre-event. But I've always favored the lead generation aspect, so, and the live element, because that's kind of part of the community. I hope that I've answered that question, Helen. Anything you need to add there, Karim?
Yeah, for sure. So one of, just to give a real life example, so one of the brands that we work with at the moment, they're called Learn Upon. I'm sure they won't mind me sharing this because I'm promoting them. But basically, it's a company called Learn Upon, and they had the exact same question as you, Helen, and because they had some really high profile guests on their chat show. For example, episode 1, which we produced with them, had the chief learning officer of NASA. Right after that, they had a C-level person from McDonald's, then General Electric. The list keeps on going, but you get the idea. It took them ages to even land these guests. So of course they wanted to make it look as slick as possible, to your point, but they didn't want to miss out on all the benefits that Ricardo was talking about. So what do? They ended up doing something really cool, where basically they would pre-record the event, we post-produce it, share it back with them, but basically the live event is a screening of what they have produced. So there's still a Q&A, there's still the live live component and all the benefits of that, Ricardo, as you were saying. But it looks, you know, it gives us, or if a team wanted to do it by themselves, you know, it gives the opportunity to breathe and to actually like have a look at the content, make sure it's proper before it finally goes live, and still people will be able to have conversations around that. So that could be a good middle option as well, I would say. But in all cases, once you get to that recorded stage, whether it was like live and then clips later, or pre-recorded and then live and then the clips later, it's always about creating these repurposed clips afterwards, for sure.
Exactly, and I'm actually going to share the way we do it for all these shows. So if you have seen the way that we promote, I like to share as much as possible in the way that we do our processes, because that's exactly the way we do it for our clients. So there was another Helen. I hope that we've answered the question. Now this one's Catherine. Catherine asked the question about, what would be, Karim, what would be your 3 favorite ingredients that changes a webinar? And by the way, everyone is bored with the word webinars. Everyone is like, so
webinar fatigue.
Webinar fatigue. What would be the 3 key ingredients that could change a webinar, a boring webinar, into a show? And then if you can just basically kind of share some example, or how a standard boring has been transformed, if at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So okay, so yeah, thank you for the question. I guess the first thing would be making a decision, once again, making a creative decision to call it a show, you know, and this may be a conversation that would be had with the leadership team, or maybe the team is autonomous to decide on that, but to basically give that a show and come up with a name for that show. That would be the first thing. The second thing is to really brand it as such. So if you think of some of our favorite shows, there's always like a hook, and then like there's like an intro sequence. There might be some like a quick like music jingle or something like that, and this really helps to create it to really help that packaging piece as well. So the second thing would be creating a dedicated show intro and outro that really helps to bookend the two, the content as such. And then last but not least is to really, and this is the hardest one, I left the hardest one for last, but really think about how you can actually make that content as binge-worthy as possible. Now, again, there is no guarantee of virality with creating a show, but if you think about it, that's not really what we're after anyway. We're after the compound effect of being able to create consistent, great episodes from the recorded events that we are creating, week on week, month on month, year on year. And really, one of the things that we found, which is not really a formula for making something binge-worthy, but it is something that we found is a trend, is to actually think of how you can juxtapose something that you're talking about with something else. So to applying juxtaposition, Ricardo, if you know what I mean. So I'll just give you one example, and I'll hand it over to you. But let's say, taking something that's very, very formal and making it easy, playful, fun, or taking something that's very nuanced and people don't really think much about it and become obsessed with it. So let's say hamburger cheese, for example. People may say, oh yeah, it's just cheese, like just put whatever. Maybe if someone creates a show, he's like, no, we are obsessed with this. There's 24 different types of cheese. There's this one, this one comes from this country, this one, so this helps to make it a bit more binge-worthy in that regard. If that answers your question. But Ricardo, tell me what you think, please.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I just want to highlight the key part is making something boring like a webinar. It's as you said, intro, outro, the way that you interact, the way that you break it, the way that you use technology like this, kind of what disappearing, appearing, all that sort of stuff, making stuff small, big. That's all really cool. What I've seen on a serious note with companies that we've worked with is that we have encouraged them to, at the very beginning, number one, a webinar, open the webinar 5 minutes before, or open your show 5 minutes before. Try to keep it light. Try to get the audience to crack a joke, to say something particular. Then obviously you got the music when you kind of enter the show. There's always a way of welcoming people in a nice way. So some people would either use, okay, as you said it, what is your best type of cheese, or what has been the weirdest tasting cheese that you've ever tried? Or you would create, towards the end, you would create like a collaborative Jamboard. So everyone would get a chance to kind of provide the summary of what they've learned in that particular session towards the end, and it's collaboratively, and I've seen that working very well. You could also have, again, there's generally kind of funny things or funny videos as a 1 minute, just to kind of to break the ice and everything. So all that stuff helps to turn something that's kind of really boring into something that really nice, interesting, even because it's just that not taking yourselves too seriously. Some of the organizations I've seen that they've just on the intro, they just kind of bring someone different from the organization that is providing the show, introducing themselves, creating that kind of linking the brand with the audience, or putting faces to names, and then entering into the particular show. And I think that's kind of pretty cool and pretty particular.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, Ricardo, one of the things, and again, it depends on how creative you want to be with this, right? So we refer to this part as the different show types. So you could actually think of, we can actually challenge ourselves with the types of webinars that we're creating. So first of all, starting to call them episodes as opposed to webinars, right? That's step one.
Totally.
But also looking at all the other types of shows that you could create. So it could be you could refer to it as like a video podcast show, or it could be a panel discussion where you have multiple people, having that you're having that conversation with. These two are the most common, but it could get a lot more wild and wonderful from there. Number one, you could create reaction video series where you're reacting to some current events or current topics that are happening in your specific B2B industry. People will be interested to see, let's say, I don't know, what Michael Jordan has to say about some recent news in basketball, because of their stature in the place, right? Beyond that, you can also decide to create something like a documentary series or a docu-series, where you start off, people may say, how is this different from a podcast? Well, the way a documentary starts in this context is you start the entire series by asking one golden question, and then use maybe a question that's very important to your industry, or a question that's very important to your specific company, perhaps, but ideally something that the audience can relate to, and to really set off on an adventure across different episodes, where every episode you might be meeting with customers, internal team members, prospects, thought leaders, trying to find answers to this question. And at the very end, you come to some sort of a conclusion. This very end, by the way, could only be, let's say, 10 episodes, and then you do a season 2 or something like that. But again, like to use a Netflix example, this question could be like, okay, what is the cause of true happiness, for example? This could be like this big golden question. And then, they go on all of these adventures, have all these conversations, and at the end they come up with an interesting conclusion. One of my favorite examples on that from a B2B perspective comes from Wistia. So Wistia, who's a video hosting platform, so they deal with video and stuff like that. So naturally they made a docu-series called 110-100, where they took one of the questions that people ask them a lot, which is, hey, does it depend, like the budget I have to create video, does that have an impact on the quality of the video in the end in terms of how successful it will be? So they came up with a video idea, and they shot it for 1,000, for 10,000, and for 100,000. The same video idea. They shot it for 3 different budgets, and they came up with some very interesting conclusions in the end. And they're a video hosting company, video hosting software. So you see the connection there. So there's a lot of different ways that you can make a webinar series a lot more exciting. It's all about how creative you're willing to go. But the easiest thing you could do is to start calling it a show and start calling them episodes.
Yeah. And I just wanted to share with the audience the framework that we use for everything we produce, especially on video. And but before, I just wanted to add also onto those specific ideas on series that we've seen at work. So again, number one, outside the ones that you've highlighted, will be the lessons learned. So if you look at it from the point of view, from a conference or an event point of view, or community, you will have big people, big thinkers, thought leaders that are sharing views, are sharing thoughts, and some of them are extremely useful. So, and especially right now, after what we've been through, it's very important to see what people think from what's happening, and what can be learned from, or what are the lessons learned. So when you create a series where you can bring either 1 per episode or 2 per episode of these thought leaders to share what are the lessons learned about ... your industry. There's a way in which you can kind of frame case studies about lessons learned, what you've done and how you're moving forward. There's also about those lessons learned is what is the future of the industry. There's the element of predictions where people would say, okay, to a thought leader, what is your prediction is going to happen within the next 2 years? It's very common right now for us that working in the events and industries, like everyone's saying, okay, what is your prediction? What do you think? How do you think 2021 is going to look like? What do you think actually is going to be 2030? And then that kind of opens up a lot of conversations. You can have series about all that sort of stuff. You can have series about, so if you've got working on a particular topic or in a particular industry, if you look at it, a conference program, you have technology, you have regulations, you have a variety of different themes among the topics that you're covering, either on an event or on a series of events. So then you can serialize that and then focus on and honing in on various of those different aspects. And personally, I think predictions, top leaders and everything, everyone always wants to have or hear a top individual, top professional in the industry about it. I think there was another question from Paul. They were saying, and then we've answered that question, probably Kareem, and then while I kind of make the switch to our framework, Paul was saying, how is it different? How is this different? Episodic marketing. How is this different to breaking down conference sessions and emailing those to your database or using within newsletters throughout the year? So I guess this is a question about perhaps format and exactly what is the difference to an event. It's just easier just to chunk it up and email it, or chunk it up and create an ebook. What's your view on that?
I love that question so much. Thank you, Paul, for that. So here's what I would say, right? What is okay, cool. So let me say it this way. Long story short, it's not going to be different if that's the way that we view it, right? But in the same time, the same way that we look at like a random shoe brand on Amazon versus like, let's say, a Nike shoe, for example, if we care about shoes, fundamentally they might share a lot of commonalities, right? But when you actually drill deeper into it, one could be completely different than the other. One is a lot more exciting than the other because it's up to you, the marketer, to actually do that, and the responsibility falls on the marketer, right? To actually make sure that they're able to package it in a way such that people do not see it like this, so that they can actually see that this is a dedicated series. A great book on this entire way of thinking would be Blue Ocean Strategy. Ricardo, you probably know this book, but are we familiar perhaps with the Blue Ocean Strategy versus Red Ocean Strategy?
No, sorry.
Cool. So it's a very no
Can
problem.
You expand on it?
Yeah, I have no life. I read books that people didn't hear about. No, but to be honest, it's an extremely popular book.
It's very popular. Yeah.
Very popular business book. But yeah, basically, Red Ocean Strategy is a term that refers to a market where everyone is pretty much doing the same thing. Really, the only way you can compete is say, oh, well, we do the same thing as the other guy, but our prices are a little bit better, or something like very, very like neck to neck competitive. That's a red ocean strategy, or red ocean in general. And naturally, what we all want to do is we want to move away from that to a blue ocean where there's no competition. And the way to invalidate the competition, so not beat the competition, because there's always going to be someone with more money, and invalidate the competition, make them irrelevant, is to almost come up with your own category. You have built your own category, and because you created it, like no one could be as better than Ricardo than at being Ricardo than Ricardo, or no one can be better than Karim at being Karim than me, right? So ultimately, it's all about how it's packaged, and that makes all the difference. Trust me.
Okay. Yeah. No. And I think to add to Karim's contribution there, Paul, is everyone sending emails, everyone sending stuff. While it might be easier for you to do that, at the end of the day, we really want to encourage, and this is what it's all about. This is what this pandemic has taught every single one of us, is that we need to raise the bar. We need to raise the quality of the engagement that we've done. Yes, you can do that and email it. Yes, you can put that into a newsletter. Yes, you can put that into a post on LinkedIn or on Twitter. But if you've got imagery, if you've got video, if you've got all these things, then you're raising the bar and then creating a different type of experience that the end user, your community, is having with your brand, and is kind of linking that as to the quality of stuff that you're able to do. And I hope I've answered that question there. So what I really wanted to highlight there, because there's a question from Redda, and it was about, in summary, is about that they have chosen to do pre-recorded, because again, you're talking to big leaders and everything. It makes it very easy for you to schedule sessions and everything. But the question there was about how severely doing a pre-recorded, and again, linking into what Helen was highlighting, pre-recorded and not kind of getting people to subscribe or to just to log on to visualize the information. How detrimental would that be to the marketing piece? But I think the answer is, I don't see it as detrimental, and I'm going to answer the question. Probably will be interesting to see your take. Mm-hmm. That wouldn't be detrimental to the lead generation element, as long as you're repurposing, and that's why I'm having this slide here. As long as you're repurposing, because if you're repurposing, it doesn't really matter, because you're elongating the lifespan of that series. You're elongating the lifespan of that particular piece of content, and I think that's kind of the value there. Anything you want to add there, Karim?
No, I think you summed it up perfectly.
Yeah. So what I really want to share with you guys on this session as well is, this is the way we by default, as an internal process, will work with any virtual event content that we produce and the clients that we work with that we encourage them to do. So let me just explain a little bit how that works. So you have your virtual event content, call it a 25 session over 4 days, or call it a webinar or a webinar series. Essentially, you're going to end up with one video piece of content, and then you ideally like to split that into several videos, whether they're long or short. But let's say you have one video, like this particular session that we're doing here today. I'm going to slice that and dice it into various sections. If you clearly noted, there is a sequence in the questioning that we've got. I just also wanted to highlight, I've got a particular framework that I have here that I know exactly I'm going to give to my team so they can split it accordingly, right? In fact, we work very closely with Karim on that, and they're kind of helping us a lot on that aspect. So we're taking the video into questions that you've asked during the session. If you had a panel, for instance, or if you had one or two individuals, you will create a video with the relevant and different questions that anyone answered, right? So that allows you to create short form content that you have a video, you'll put it on YouTube, you can put it on LinkedIn, on Twitter, or whatever platform you use. And as a result of that, you put that into a blog post on your website, right? With, guess what? A summary, right? The other aspect that you would also do is that you create images with quotes, whether it's something that Karim said, like for instance, right now we're going to create an image quote or an image summary where we have the top 5 most important ways in which you can split virtual event content, and then we're going to release that, either put it on a carousel on LinkedIn or actually create 5 different posts on LinkedIn. Yeah. Of course, you need a summary article. Why? Because to Paul and other people's comments on the session, we're talking about video. People are going to consume that video, but some people want to read it. But also, the most important thing, Your Majesty, Google, and all the search engines might really want to know what this is all about. So that's the reason why you want to create a summary. There's a big thing that you don't really want to do. The transcriptions, because transcriptions are boring, right? So you really need to create like a summary article on what you've done. So, and probably Caroline might be able to send you something that what we've done before, some of the previous webinars that we've done before. You will see it very clearly. Or if you want to wait, we're going to release a blog post next week with this framework and exactly with examples of how that's done. So you create a summary article, and also you create, you might be able to create a blog post. Now, what is the difference between a blog post and a summary article? A summary article just simply tells you the top 5 things that were discussed on the session, or whatever you think, like the top takeaways. The blog post is a little bit more in-depth. So if you see the example that we've shared just now, where we were promoting, so if you notice the link that we've done with the producing the video, we knew that like we were not going to expand too much time on it, but we wanted to create informational video about an informational blog post about what is the stack, what are the tools that you can use to promote that kind of video content easily and everything. And surprise, surprise, you're going to find out that we just put a call to action there to this particular webinar. Not only we released that last week as means to generate registrations for this event, but now more importantly, that is going to help us create evergreen content that we're going to do moving forward. So over the next 6 months, we're going to continue doing marketing campaigns with the quotes, with these videos, with the summary article, and with additional blog posts to drive more engagement. And again, I wanted to highlight the name of the game in this particular game to win and to beat your competition, that blue ocean thing, is to really beat, just to really enhance that 3x potentially that you're able to generate in terms of awareness or leads or registrations to that virtual event. And finally, there's this other thing which it requires a little bit more extra work. I take that, and you can also create what you call audiograms, right? So which are excerpts with audio without kind of motion graphics or anything of nuggets of information that were shared, and they work very, very well. You can also convert that piece. We can convert all these webinars into an audio podcast, although I have certain views about how that's done and whether it's good or not. But you might see that now many podcasters are now doing YouTube interviews where they're just basically having the interview, and they might as well release it on video as well as the podcast. And then the other element is the animated text videos, because they just kind of are not as difficult to produce from the point of view of video recording and everything. But then you can have animated text videos with either pictures, text, or anything like that. So this is the framework that we use ourselves, the framework that we help clients to work with, and in fact, the way in which we work with Tribe Tactics to enhance this element. You don't have to do that yourself. That's kind of why companies like us, companies like Tribe Tactics exist. Karim, you want to expand on anything on that? And I'm conscious that we have only 2 minutes. My goodness, time flies when you're having fun. Anything you want to add in here?
Yeah,
Karim?
no, I think you've covered a lot for sure. I'm also seeing some really interesting questions pop up, so perhaps we can address those in the last few minutes that we have. What do you think?
Sorry, can you? I was just kind of distracted reading another question. Can you just respond that?
Oh, I was just going to say that exactly that like I think we can even use the final few minutes to just address some of the questions that we had over here. I think there's a question from Lily on says, yeah, I think this is certainly where B2B needs to head, but the trouble is to convince the rest of the team and leadership. So Lily, will make sure that we can arrange this afterwards, but I'll be happy to send you a complimentary copy of the book I wrote on the topic called Original Series, where we go in depth on how you can actually, the different ways that you can actually influence leadership to actually get a show off the ground for the very first time. Because it is something that is quite new, but that's also the benefit of doing something like that.
Perfect. Now, there's another question where you say, is there a way to get people to engage with content better? My customers watch videos, but it ends there. How will it encourage discussion? How can we encourage discussion around episodes?
Yeah, so in terms of that, like this is, again, I love this question so much because back to what Ricardo was saying around the importance of repurposing that content. Here's the thing, right? Like promoting the content is not just marketing's job. It should be something that's the organization's job. Marketing may just be responsible for the management of, the project management of creating that content, but ultimately every person in sales, every person in marketing, every person in customer success, anyone who's client facing should actually use that content to drive discussions. Now you might be wondering, okay, but they were not in the videos, so what's the motivation for them? I'll tell you what the motivation for them is. The motivation for them is career growth, because they can actually use that content as a way to build their own, very own unique personal brands on LinkedIn and other platforms by simply taking the content that you guys as marketing are producing and perhaps just putting their own original signature on it by maybe captioning it or using it as a way to start conversations with prospects or to really build their knowledge in that space. We've seen a lot of companies do that. And even though the content starts with marketing, it really ends up getting distributed by everyone else in the company so that they can encourage discussion around these episodes. Ricardo, what would you say to that?
No, I would say that it's just about like using cool things that like, adding particular call to actions or linking specifically after the end of your webinar. You, depending on where you're hosting that video, if you're hosting that video on YouTube, then you have the overview at the bottom where you can do things. Then it's just about making sure that a video, it's not just a video, it's just a piece of marketing. There's now funky tool where you can create calls to action, where you can create forms, where you can kind of then show other stuff that will be relevant. And even not even technology, you need to make sure that like on that video itself, you're pushing people to take the next desired action. So, which by the way, brings me to the point, the next desired action that we want from all of you that are now attending this session or that are looking at this video is that, number one, if you want us to have a look from BrightBull's point of view, if you want us to have a look at the content that you have, the repository that you have, and get some ideas on how we can just make it, how you can slice it and dice it, feel free to schedule a call with us, and then we'll be very happy. I mean, I'll be very happy to spend time with you, kind of brainstorming some ideas on that. If you are looking at perhaps how to turn a boring webinar into a series of episodes, then we'll be very happy to do with that, with all the aspects on repurposing content and how to do. Let's say right now you've produced your virtual event and you are sitting on 25 different 1-hour sessions, half an hour sessions of video. Then you need to speak to Karim, because Karim's company, Tribe Tactics, does absolutely that. It's about how can you give them that video and how they will basically turn that into the framework that we've just discussed, into splitting it and slicing and dicing. I was running a poll on LinkedIn where many of the people that answered this question were saying, it's just that we're too busy. We just don't really have the time, because we're now thinking about, guess what? Next week's episode. And this is kind of where it's important to work either with a partner or have the resources internally or the tools internally that would allow you to do that. I know that we ran out of time, I can't see that there's any more specific questions thus far, but Karim, anything you want to do as a closing note?
No, I loved what you said around that people who do have this this idea / challenge should definitely get in touch, because like we all need a friend who can help us navigate that. So yeah, hopefully this session was useful to the people. And of course, like if there's any questions, please feel free to get in touch with Ricardo or myself, and we'll be happy to look after you accordingly.
Okay, everybody, thank you very much for staying towards the end, those of you that did. And Karim, thank you very much. It's been really, really useful, insightful, and until next time.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.